Oh, we're recording. Thank you. Dang, I always forget. You know what? I always forget to do that. All right. Thank you. Next slide. Well, all of you guys have attended before, right? But you know what? Put your name in the chat. So that what I'm doing is I'm tracking attendance. You will get a training certificate in August with all the hours you acquired for attending the sessions. You get 1 hour per session. And then, so I'm tracking all that. And then number 2, Anna, do you want to go to the next slide, please? So before we get rolling into the WACs that we're going to talk about this evening, is I really am putting a plug out there, especially hi Deborah, those of you who have attended before, is we really need reps for the negotiations. So far we have only 6 of you. Oops, somebody needs to mute. Thank you. And what we're looking for is 4 per region. And so we're really trying to push it out there and plug. You were on the wrong link. That's all right. To become a rep. And so the reps, the groups are community foster parents, which is all of you. We were referring to you as general, and now we're referring to you as community foster parents within licensing division. I'm not sure if you guys know that, but that decision was made. I know, Shayla, you were like, we will have 2 CPA representatives there who are staff, either licensors or licensing supervisors, who will be at the table. We will have our tribal partners at the table for negotiations, and then we will also have parents and youth with lived experience at the table. And these are the individuals who will be coming up the WAC, voting on consensus. So it's a very critical part of the NRM process. And so far we only have, like I said, six caregivers who have volunteered their time. So I'm putting that plug out there to you guys. If you're interested, you can reach out to me or email the website. I am going to be sending out a big email next week with more information on it. Can you send me details with obligations? Details, yes. Yep, you'd like to know more. Okay, sure, Shayla. And then trying to, and if you guys can't do it, or if you feel like it's too much on your plate, you may know of other caregivers who may be interested in the process as well. So just putting that out there for you all to think about. And if you want more information, I will send it to you, and or we can set up a time to also talk about it. Okay. All right. So let's shut this slide deck down. Thank you, Deborah. So, those of you who are interested, I really need to. Sheila, you're region 1. Deborah, are you region 6? You can't hear you, honey. Tiffany, you're region 6, right? Arbonne?
Yeah, I'm region 6.
I know, and I know that you're interested, so thank you. Carla, what region are you in?
I'm in East King, whatever region that is. So Bellevue, east of Bellevue.
So you're region 4. Okay. All right. Deborah, where do you live, or what county? We lost her. She lost her voice. Okay. Felix, I'm the note taker today, so y'all bear with me. And let me find. All right. So tell me what you guys are you seeing the first WAC here?
Yes, we are. If you don't mind zooming in a little bit, just to make it a little bigger.
Is that making it bigger?
Yes, perfect, Marsh.
Okay.
I think that's
Oh, and
good.
I'm sorry, I forgot to say which wax we're covering today. All right, 1395, admitting or retaining children in your home. 1615, which is a discipline whack. And 1620, restraining a child. So those are the three whack that we need more input on this evening.
Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. We're looking at 1395. Do I have to admit or retain all children? So before we start getting into the WAC, I thought we'd kind of start today a little different and just kind of talk about the subjects within this WAC. The first subject to kind of talk about is let's talk about declining a placement, right? So you all are caregivers. And are there times where you decline a placement, and what does that look like? What are the reasons behind declining that placement?
Mine have generally been scheduling, like emergent need, and my scheduling doesn't allow for it.
So are you talking about when they call you and ask if you can take a placement, or after the placement's already in your home?
Yeah, when placement desk gives you that call and they're saying, okay, we have this kiddo, and they give you the rundown of them. What are some things that
Well, okay, well, like me, they call me a lot. I do teenagers and I do sibling groups. So right now I already have a sibling that's left from a previous group here. That's a 17-year-old girl. So right now I'm only taking girls, and it needs to be a sibling group that can go into a single room, and age 12 and older. They need to be able to get themselves off to school. I do work 3 days out of the home, so I leave early enough that I have to be able to trust that they're going to be able to get themselves on the school bus, that kind of thing. So mine are a little more specific, and I try not to take singles, because then if a sibling group comes up, I may not be able to take them.
Okay.
Great. Vaughn or Deborah, what were some reasons that you would decline a placement when placement desk gives you that initial call?
This is Vaughn. Reasons would be depending on my current placement that's in the house, what's happening with that current placement, and thinking about the placement that wants to come in and the chipper, and figuring out if there's going to be impact on my current placement. So that's one reason I have said no before. Another reason is based on looking at the chipper, feeling as if I'm equipped to deal with the situation of what is written in the chipper on the child, if they have some different needs that I don't know if I am able to support them. I don't just take a placement. I really think about it, because I want to be a placement for a child if it's temporary or long term. I'm looking at short and long sight. So I do know I have done some respites,
Okay.
but I'm thinking it through, and if it doesn't work for our current placement that we already have in the house, then I'm saying no. Those are the main two reasons.
Okay.
And age as well. That's a factor for me, the age of the child.
Is it the age that's on your license that limits you, or the age that you would like to take? What are you licensed for, Ron?
I'm licensed for, I believe, 3 to 8.
Okay.
And so I still get calls sometimes when it's out of that placement range.
Okay.
And I still do consider it, because I look at the whole chipper. It's really important that those chippers are accurate too. I've had a lot of issues with taking that chipper for face value, and that sometimes has not always worked out because the chipper isn't accurate. That's a side note.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carla, you have a thumbs up. Tell us why.
Yeah, I have found that the chippers, you really have to read between the lines.
Okay,
I wish that they would make them more accurate so people can make a good judgment call on whether that child's gonna fit in your home. Yeah, I actually had some girls that I had for 8 months, and the last 5 of those 8 months was really, really rough. And finally had to, at about 5.5 months or so, I had to have them removed from my home because of the problems they were causing, and they did thousands of dollars worth of damage to my home. And then the chipper for them after they left my home was completely wrong. And the woman that took them after me had them for 2 months and had to make them leave for the same problems I had. And she contacted me and was upset because she was a first-time foster parent, which is not, she's not fostering anymore. We lost her as a foster parent because of that chipper not being accurate. And I think it's important that they make them accurate so people know what they're getting into with kids. For me, I take them straight from it, when they first come into the system. So I don't know what I'm getting, and I'm okay with that. But for somebody who's should be able to get an accurate chipper, you got to do a lot of reading between the lines.
yeah, it's hard to get it. It's hard to get a read if you're taking kids who are getting pulled from their biological or their legal guardians, because
Yeah,
we don't always have a lot of information on.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
And that's to be expected. But when
Yeah.
they're coming from within the system, those chippers need to be accurate.
I have some follow-up comments on that. One thing is, I have been impressed with the agency. When I see a chipper and I'm like, what does that really mean? What does that sentence really mean? Like how Carla was saying, like you're reading in between the lines. I have always been able to say, I would like to speak to someone that knows more about this. And the agency has always been like, yes, let me connect you to so-and-so, and I'm getting a quick response of a phone conversation. So I lean into that because I don't want to have to read in between the lines. I'm more of a literal person. And so I have found the agency helpful in that. And the second thing, based on what Carla was saying, is the chipper not being accurate. And then, that doesn't work out. And then they're going to the next foster parent and it's still inaccurate. I have actually said to a person after a placement, can I please update this chipper based on my experience? And I mean, some people may call me too direct. I get that. But I want to avoid what Carla is exactly speaking about. Like, I know this chipper is not accurate. It was updated a year ago. This child needs to be updated. And every time I've said that, someone said, absolutely, give me what you've got and we will look into updating it. And I have done that. So a lot of times, with agencies, you got to take the initiative. But what I'm saying is when I've taken the initiative, it's very well received.
nice to hear.
What
So
about
you-
you, Deborah? Any input on or reasons that you choose to decline placements when placement desk gives you a call?
I pretty well agree with just, what are the placements I already have in my house and how they're going to fit. But to that point, my case manager, Robin Antonson, is fantastic. She will read that chipper and she's already kind of determined that it would be a good placement for this reason or that reason before she even contacts me about taking a child. I have other times said, hey, I saw this on the weekend website thing, and she'll be honest. She'll say, Deb, I read the chipper, very thorough. I think because of XYZ, it wouldn't be a great fit. So she is amazing for me. Just to make sure that all of my placements are successful, and knock on wood, they all have been. I haven't had to have a child leave for, the different reasons that come up for sure.
And Deborah, are you referring to your
Yeah.
placement desk coordinator? Like, is that the person you're referring to, or are you talking about a specific worker?
Are you-
CFSF,
Oh, okay.
Robin Atkinson, she's down here, and she's the licensor person, but she used to be like my house case aide that would come and visit the kids, and then now she does the licensing part.
Okay, so you have a relationship with that person.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
Are
she
you-
is the one that calls to see if I am open to a placement.
Gotcha.
But
I-
she really goes through it before she even calls.
Are you with the CPA, Deborah?
CPA, I don't know that term.
Child Placing Agency?
Yes, CFSF, Community
Okay,
Family
so you're with Community
Services
Family?
Foundation.
Okay,
And it really does make the difference, because they're not trying, they want it to be successful, that they're not just trying to,
mhm.
get the head count down, which I understand that pressure as well.
Thank you. Well, on the flip side, to this question is, what are those reasons where you kind of had to call the placement early, right? And end that placement? And what did that look like? Was that something that could be scheduled out and you could determine a end date, or was that something where you just had to drop that kiddo off at the office? What did that look like for you when you had to end a placement?
So when I had to end my placement one was a little over a year ago. I tried to work with social worker for several months to try to correct the behavior problems. I mean, it was everything from stealing to busting cabinets and doors, which was kind of surprised because they weren't very large little ladies. They were very strong though. They didn't do any physical damage to my other placement, but they tormented her. So for several months, we tried to correct their behavior with the place, with the social workers' help, and it wasn't working. And my current placement fell back into her self-harm behaviors that we hadn't seen in well over a year. And so finally I was like, okay, that's it. She's got to go. The girls have got to go. And it took him another 6 weeks before he even put the kids on the list. I think he was hoping I would change my mind. I have never had to ever make any other placement ever leave my home. These girls were more than what I could handle. And I mean, I felt like the social worker really wasn't listening to me. So it was a rough thing. We've got the social worker I have for my other child is amazing, and she was a huge help to help us resolve the problem and get the girls moved. So yeah, it did not go well. The girls' behavior escalated a lot after they found out that they were going to get moved. So yeah, it was
Thanks for
not
thanks for
ideal.
sharing, Carla. Yeah.
So Carla, when you asked to move them, did you give a time frame, or did you say I need them done now? I mean, what did that
Well,
look?
I started out with talking to the social worker and telling him that everything that he was trying to help us do, nothing was working, and that it was becoming too difficult for my current foster placement. And he said he totally understood. And I said, okay, I said, I need you to find them a new placement and get them on the list. And he asked if they could stay until the new placement was found. And initially I said yes, that would be fine, figuring that he could put them on the list. And hopefully find them a placement within a reasonable amount of time. But weeks kept passing. And it was almost 6 weeks before he finally got them on the list. And I had to call his supervisor and demand that they do something before it actually happened.
Yeah, Carla, when you kind of knew you were at your limit and then you still wanted to work with the social worker, what do you feel like would have been a reasonable amount of time in that situation?
Well, I felt like as soon as I told him that I'd had enough, that this was it, he should have put him on the list.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't have taken him 6 weeks to get him there, right? Once he put them on the list, they had a placement in less than 2 weeks.
Okay.
And to me, that, 2 weeks would have been reasonable. I was definitely not thinking that he was going to wait 6 weeks to even get him on the list.
Mm-hmm.
But
So
what do the others think is as reasonable? I mean, I think the intent of talking about the WAC, Felix, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is preventing kids and caregivers or group for home facilities of just bringing a kid into the department and saying, I can't do it anymore. Which is traumatic for everybody,
right.
for the child mostly, but also hard on the caregiver. It's hard on the social worker. So trying to figure out how we can best facilitate when a placement is starting to fall apart. So hearing from this group, I mean, what is reasonable in your mind? I mean, Carla, you said 2 weeks.
I think 2 weeks was fair. I mean, I had already spent 3 months working with social worker, trying to make this work before I finally told him that was it. I couldn't do it anymore. And that was really because of the effect it was having on my current placement that I had. And she'd been with me for over 4 years at that point. I could not take a chance on her, going downhill because of these 2 girls.
Okay.
And so if it had been just me here, I would have kept working with the girls, but it wasn't just me. I had to protect the current placement I had. I guess for me, I just felt like I wasn't being listened to. But yeah, I think if a foster parent says, okay, I can't do this anymore, I'll give you time to find a new placement, I would think that 2 weeks would be fair.
Okay.
But it was way longer than that for me.
Anybody else have an idea or what you think would be, fair?
For me, it really seems like it's going to be case specific, but if we needed a general guideline, I think that 2 weeks also seems reasonable. Like we know that it's an immediate health or safety issue, then 2 weeks is too long sometimes.
Okay.
Does anyone else want to share their experience before we move into the WAC? All right, so keeping in mind all the thoughts that everyone shared, let's take a look at the WAC. It's a short one, but let's take a moment to read it on your own and see if there's anything that we could emphasize, rearrange, add, or wordsmith.
Felix, remind us again, the purple is, you've got, this does not include temporary visits under 72 hours. Did you add that? Is that new language in there?
That was just something to highlight. Again, normally I put the purple is typically a federal standard, but on this
Okay.
one I miscoded. So that was just one that I wanted to emphasize so that people are aware of that.
So this is the prudent parenting.
That's correct, Marge. Shyla, I see you talking, but I think you're on mute.
Thank you. I think it would be nice to actually reference that. Just adding that verbiage. This does not include temporary visits under 72 hours as permitted by prudent parenting guidelines. And that way, whenever that comes up for people, they know where this, what to refer back to for more information about prudent parenting guidelines.
I can spell right now.
And then for me, like, you must also comply with travel requirements. I guess I'd have to follow the back. So I'm like, what is that doing here? What is it trying to tell me?
This travel whack.
Yeah, the statement that you must also comply with travel requirements. Then I'd be like, oh, what are they trying to tell me here? What am I not understanding? So then I'd have to go to the WAC, which having the link there is helpful.
Oh, did we talk about
Like,
this one
go ahead.
already? Getting written approval, child's caseworker, prior to travel over 72 hours or out of the country. So the question is how does this WAC tie into whether to retain or, deny a placement? I don't understand how this ties together.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was saying too. Like, I'm like, oh, well, what does that mean? I guess I better go look because I don't know what they're trying to tell me by putting this here.
Right. Right. So I'll make a note of that. But you know what? I got to shut this down and then I'll get my other doc going again. Like, wait a minute. If I shut it down, am I going to shut my meeting down? Okay. Okay. Anybody else? I think we really, the intent here is to have a conversation about, when you guys, deny placement or, not deny, whether you decline and then how, if a placement's starting to, fall apart, what do you do?
I noticed an acronym, SOGIE.
Uh-huh.
Are we using acronyms in the WACs? And
So-
if so, is there an acronym definition sheet that comes with the WACs? Or are we supposed to Google it?
No, so at the beginning of this chapter, 148, there is a definition page that will refer to all the acronyms.
Okay,
But SOGI here it's already spelled out. It's sexual orientation, gender identity,
Think easy expression.
Yeah, expression. So and what they're doing is this is up to our pro team who are writing the WACs, is they will be consistent with the acronyms and how they're referenced in both the group care WAC and the foster care WAC. But what we'll do is make a comment here about the acronyms. What I would think is, like, if I was reading a chapter and I would not remember the definitions, is to be able to click on the acronym and take me back up to the definition.
definitions, yes.
So I'm not scrolling and running and like, oh, wait a minute, what is that?
Right,
Okay,
that would be the most helpful if possible.
okay.
Make it easy for us.
Yes.
I have a question about the number 2, where it talks about some child placing agencies have contracts that say you cannot deny a placement. What if you don't feel like you're able to? I guess that kind of concerns me. If my licensor called and said, hey, I have a kid, and I say, well, I just don't think it'll be a good fit because of what I have going on or whatever. And they say, well, I can't deny it. What is that? What is that WAC
What it-
actually saying?
Well, what is this referencing to? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know
Um,
either. If Marge, if we could highlight that one, I can
Mm.
look into that. I don't know of any specific CPAs that do have that.
Well,
I
some
can
of our
look into-
CPAs have a BRS contract. And which is BRS, behavior. What does BRS stand for, guys?
Behavioral Rehabilitation Services.
Thank you. So it's our children that are have behaviors that are more intense, and we pay our caregivers more, they get more money taking on our kids, but it's CPAs have a contract.
kids.
And I think what it is you cannot because of that contract, you can't deny taking a youth who may have behaviors where you're agreeing to the contract and to care, to provide services and care and support for that child. So say you are a BRS home and you have a sexually aggressive youth, then you can't deny taking that youth, but you would know if that was the case, because there's a whole contract, a whole plan behind our BRS homes. But we can get clarification here to think, check to make sure I'm right.
So that's not really speaking to me, just an average home with not a specialized training,
Right.
etc.
No.
Okay.
No. Mm-mm. If you're licensed by a private agency to be a community caregiver, then this my understanding is, and we'll clarify, my understanding is this number 2 does not apply to you. And in order to be a BRS home, you have to do extra training. So you would be actively involved as a caregiver in preparing yourself with training in gaining more skill sets and taking on those kids. Now, keep in mind that's all changing because we have our professional therapeutic foster care coming up. That's a whole other conversation. Deborah, are you with a private agency?
Yes.
Yeah.
Community Family Services
Well, that's right.
Foundation.
I'm sorry, yes. Which they used to have a BRS contract. I don't know if they do anymore.
All right. Do you have any other thoughts on this WAC before we move on to the next one?
Move on.
Move on.
All right. So the
Yeah.
next WAC is 1615. What are the requirements for disciplining children? The background behind this is the principal got the intent behind this is that caregivers do not use corporal or degrading punishments. Part of the assessment process, we can't really verify a caregiver's behavior. So here you do see some federal standards which are highlighted. The federal requirements just let you know what you can't do. And then we let you decide with prudent parenting on what your discipline technique will be. There is some suggested edits that are in green.
Exercise or excessive chores, yeah.
And you can see that we had a lot of comments saying that we should not use punishment and instead use discipline. And then one thing that I want to talk about is C. Someone suggested that we don't use the word time out and instead use the time in. I wanted to talk to the group about this. Would that be known, or if we start using time in, or is there another word that we can use that's the same as time out? What are your all thoughts on this?
And also, so to give you some background on this, when we looked at our WACs, we went and looked at our licensing investigations and complaints that have come in, say, over the last 2 years. And this is the WAC that this and supervision are the 2 WACs that are most that come in the most regarding violations that have valid findings of our caregivers not understanding what they can do and can't do when it comes to discipline. So what that tells me is it can we write this clearer so we have less provider actions and valid findings? I mean, I don't know. I'm just putting that out there for thought, but that's another way to look at this, is to know some of that background history.
Back to time in.
Mhm.
I believe that not everyone will understand what time in means from a general standpoint. I don't know what others think.
I have to be honest, I've never heard that term, time in.
I've heard it, but I agree that a lot of people won't understand it, and unless we want to educate around the nuances and difference, it's,
We call it a reset.
I don't even know why we're giving it to people as an option.
I mean, why have timeout as a method of guidance? I mean, why is that in the WAC? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of information out there, especially with kids experiencing trauma, that timeout is not only not effective, but increases trauma, the feelings of being abandoned or unable to rely on their caregiver. There's no co-regulation happening. So, I mean, I know it's contentious and everybody has a lot of opinions, but it feels like a stretch to me to give it as a valid option.
I mean, we're not calling out other methods of discipline to use, or that's okay to use. So it's like, do we call them all out, or do we just say, you know, refer to the case plan, or, you know, or work with the child's therapist? I don't know.
Maybe different language altogether. Now I'm like, oh boy. Now, you know, so think of the solution to that, right? That's a great suggestion. But I heard someone say reset. I know in our house, we call it an opportunity to calm and retry, redo. That's the language we use. Doesn't mean people will understand that or want to use that same language.
Mhm.
But you're basically saying it's a time to just, what we say here, I'm using my words, calm our body is what I say, and maybe we can try again in a few minutes, whatever we're trying to do. With my 5-year-old, that's the language I am using with him. That's probably not apropos to all age levels.
But it's still.
Yeah, Vaughn, as you were talking,
Fresh.
if we were to completely remove the word time out and just say methods of guidance allowing children time to change their behavior, does that hold the same meaning?
What about opportunity to change their behavior?
There we go. Can we write that one down, Marge?
That's what I do with my teens. I give them opportunity to think about what they did wrong so that they can make a better decision and try again.
Yeah, what's the group think about that?
Thinking of my 5-year-old, that's I'm using different words, but that's exactly the same thing I'm doing as well.
Gotcha.
So opportunity to change behavior. So I wanna push this out here is, do you feel like this WAC should be identifying any modes of discipline? Does this WAC say to you, I only can use these positive methods, which includes redirection, giving choices, timeout, planning in order to prevent problems, using positive reinforcement? I mean,
Maybe
that
it should
too-
be,
is that
maybe
too
it should-
prescriptive?
yeah, I mean, maybe it should be positive methods could include, meaning that there could be more than what's listed.
Yeah, putting the could in there opens it up a little bit more. Is that what we're
Mhm.
thinking?
I definitely see that as a positive change, but I kind of agree with where Marjorie's going, that I don't know if it belongs in the WAC at all, calling out the parenting techniques to use. You know, we have a whole body of work through Alliance that teaches these things.
Mhm.
I'm not sure the WAC is where it belongs.
I think because it's so prescriptive with trauma, age, other children in the home, and it's really, for me, just as a caregiver, it would be hard if it was, this WAC was so prescriptive for this kind of a child in disciplining. And then methods of disciplining, I mean, this was written probably 10 years ago, have changed. They're always changing, right? I mean, of course, my kids are in their 30s, but
Yeah, exactly. Anything that we're going to put in here that has a pretty strong chance of changing rather quickly doesn't feel like it's the place, like a WAC appropriate
a place for
guideline.
it's in
Yeah,
WAC.
we can't change the WAC fast enough to keep up, right?
Mhm. How do the others feel about this?
Well, I agree. I think that it's a tough one to have in here because you can't have it too prescriptive because it is so different based on the child, the situation, age.
Yeah.
And like you're saying too, I mean, things change so fast, but I think it's important to stress that there's positive methods of discipline versus the negative ones, right?
So we could
So
say there's positive versus negative and leave it at that. I mean, I think when I did, Felix, you can chime in here as well. When I did my licensing investigations, it was never about, oh, well, of course, it doesn't come in because they're doing something right. It's just, looking at child abuse and neglect, what can't they do when it comes to discipline? I don't know if I just made sense there or not. Okay. So when we come to negotiations, a further conversation can be, do you recommend removing this? 3 altogether. 4 has to stay. It's tied to our federal regulations.
I think that's the challenge because 4 has to stay.
Uh-huh.
So we know 4 is going to be in there no matter what. So I think the attempt here is to show what you can't do and what you should be doing, but not be too prescriptive on what you should be doing. And so I'm going back and forth on this. I totally agree with Shayla. Like, okay, how are you going to keep this active and up to date? And I also see if we're going to talk about what we can't do, well, I would like some examples of what is allowed and what is good based on trauma and everything What if I am not current on my alliance training? What if I just, let's not assume that, you know? So I'm going back and forth on that, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think there needs to be something in there, like she said, that to give them examples, and maybe it should say that, right? Positive methods could include the following examples, or something to that effect.
But is WAC a place to give example?
Yeah, I don't know. I
So
don't know.
what we've done in other places when it comes to discipline, which really we're talking about behavior, is, you know, the social worker, child welfare social workers involved, a therapist might be involved, is, you know, putting language in there, you know, putting together a discipline plan that fits the child and meets the child's best needs. How do y'all, what do y'all think of that?
Well, maybe it's to work with your social worker, therapist, and so on to create that discipline plan for the child.
So basically what you just said, Marjorie, basically what you just said,
Yeah,
What about,
using language like that, like what Carla, I think, was just saying, like, you know, please, you know, consult the social worker and therapist if applicable in coming up with an appropriate, based on the child's needs, discipline plan, you know, like something of that nature
mhm.
that isn't specific, wouldn't ever need to be updated unless that changed, which I doubt, that plan of action.
Okay. You can tell it's the end of the day. And you know, not all kids will need a discipline plan, but maybe it's as simple as, this is how I discipline, you know, this age group, your little 5-year-old, and making sure that everybody's aware of what you're doing. I don't know if you have conversations about how you manage behavior that may not be positive in your home. Or do you just the department, it just relied that you're skilled, you've got some training and you know how to do it?
I actually, with my 5-year-old, do talk to his therapist
Okay,
about appropriate discipline methods, and we actually practice those. So that resonates for me in my situation, because I am still learning. Every day is a learning day with you know, a child that's been through trauma. And so I have actually utilized his therapist because he has play therapy and I go every other week with him to therapy. And I have utilized the therapist. Like, when this comes up,
what
what
do
are
I
some
do?
methods that would be best serving him? And, you know, she's role played with me. She's, you know, said, well, try this and then come back to me and tell me how it goes. And then we'll go from there. So I have actually utilized that.
So when I was out in the field, Felix, I don't know about you, but many foster parents were not managing behaviors. Let's just take the word discipline out in a vacuum. There were a lot of people involved to help with that, just like you're saying, Bon. A therapist, the social worker, you know, the professional, you know, whoever the professional team is they were working with them to figure out what fits best for that individual child in the home. So I think adding language like that, instead of, you know, talking about what positive is, might be better for kids, and also give guidance for our for our caregivers, because the intakes we get are, they're overwhelmed and they don't know what to do. But if we have do we want to go down the road of a discipline plan? We can build that in here and make that part of the policy. That may help our caregivers, which then would help our kids.
What if it was, and this might be a little bit redundant, somewhat generalized for the average home, but then some kind of wording for children with more challenges, that they create a challenge plan. They create a challenge plan with the teachers, the doctor, the staff, whatever is included in that. But instead of calling it a discipline plan or whatever, call it a challenges plan. And then it's a little less angry sounding. This is a discipline plan. Well,
Right.
this just has challenges. Why don't we try to meet those challenges and see what works the best? Just, kind of turning down the volume on the word discipline or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Oh, dang, I hate this. So is there another word we could use for discipline? Or Felix, did they come up with another? Did you make another comment about changing the word discipline?
No, I think the idea that was thrown out there was calling it a behavioral management whack.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what you all think about that.
Which kind of talks about what y'all have been talking about. But not every kid's going to need a behavior management plan, is what
Right.
I'm
That's what I was
hearing.
gonna say. I think that, I've had, in all my foster kids, I only had one sibling group that I could have really used that help. So for most kids, in my experience, the basics of talking to them, things like that works, right? So I like the behavior management whack. I think that helps, but whether is everybody going to know what that means?
And do the feds use the word discipline? No, they use punishment. Or just, we're adding discipline in there. Okay.
I don't like punishment myself. I don't use that word in my house when it comes to kiddos.
Okay.
So
And that looks like that's a recommendation of a change here. All right, so we're at 6:55 and we have one more. Go ahead, Felix.
Oh, I just wanted to add that I believe that this is my opinion, just on what I've looked into, is I think punishment gets tied in with like corporal punishment, or degrading punishment. So maybe that's why they use it, but it looks like we have recommendations to use discipline, which holds the same meaning.
What about adding excessive exercise? It should say excessive exercising or excessive chores. We get a lot of intakes coming in where that's how they address behavior issues, especially with older kids.
I think if it's happening, it should be listed. You all know what the intakes are coming in and what they're saying. I don't have a problem with it being added. If that's what's happening, then that's how I believe. I feel like it should be called out and listed so that everyone's very clear.
well, and then what's excessive, right? Because I run a farm and my kiddos help out on the farm. We all work together to take care of all the animals and the farm. And that's part of what seems to help them to have that responsibility. And I've never had a child say that it was excessive.
I think
But-
helping. Oh, you're talking about the chores, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would depend on what is considered excessive, right? How would you draw that line? I think kids being involved in the home and the care of the home and the property, the farm, whatever, helps make them feel like they belong and they're part of the family and they get responsibility and they learn a lot of empathy.
Well, I'm just gonna throw another wrench in there for y'all to think about. It's like, if we start calling out, excessive exercise and chores, is that in the best interest of the kids? And then does that tie back into that language of, your discipline plan or what we're gonna call it? It needs to be in the best interest of a child. And, the investigations I did, it was like, you have to do 100 sit-ups and push-ups and that's kind of the excessive behavior or discipline that they were using. But it really wasn't in the best interest of the youth. So thinking about, how prescriptive do we want the WAC to be? If we start listing out do's and don'ts.
What if I agree with the gal that has the farm. My kids,
Mhm.
I don't have a farm, but they feed the dogs. They help me pick up dog poop. We set the table. We unset the table. They're a part of my family.
Yep.
And, but the other part, as far as like the exercise, etc., is how many times do you get so frustrated at work or home, you just go for a walk because it's good for you. You're getting oxygen going to your brain and you can think clearer. So I don't think that, saying, hey, you need to go for a walk. Now, if I suppose you could just say anything that might be a normal expectation of exercise and chores should default with the case aid specifically, and you make a challenge plan for additional stuff. Because you might have a kid that he really rallies if he's, running the track at high school for, 4 miles. But somebody else might say, no, that's excessive. Well, not if the child wants it and it's agreed upon between the home. I had my own biologic son who he excelled in the Army and football with those hard, sweaty workouts that helped him. So I think that could be case by case, and you could just say, anything beyond just a reasonable walking, exercising, you could create a challenge plan for that child with their caseworker and doctor. So that kid that does need more, maybe he needs to do 100 push-ups for his OCD. Let him do it. But you've made that plan and you're safe as far as being called out for excessive exercise. No, me and the caseworker and their therapist have agreed upon this, and this is what works for him.
So you could say anything beyond reasonable creative challenge plan that is in the best interest of the child or youth.
Yeah, because I think, again, it could be really case specific. So why make everybody do the same thing?
Okay. Any thoughts on that from the rest of the group?
I agree. I had a kiddo that loved to punch things like holes in the walls. So I got a punching bag.
Yep.
And put that up in the garage, and he would go out and he would beat on that bag for 30 minutes to an hour. And just go get out whatever it is that is bothering him. Or he'd take a baseball bat and go beat on a tree because I got acre plus of trees, right? So
Okay.
I think it's going to be tough because how do you say that without it making it sound like they can't do that stuff that helps them in the long run?
Mm-hmm. Shayla, do you have thoughts?
These examples are great, but what I'm hearing is that, everybody's like, well, I don't want to do that because they choose or they like, or this is good for them. This is something they want to do. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about assigned punishment. We're calling it discipline, but this is one of those areas where, like, the word punishment helps frame, if you're assigning a consequence, that's where we're saying excessive exercise or excessive chores should not, like, I understand why they're there. We've all seen stories of kiddos who've dropped dead from being told to run around the house for an hour. And so, I mean, I get why it's there. And maybe reframing the top part about being more clear about what we're talking about, like prescribed consequence.
Described.
We're not talking about my kid loves to hit a punching bag when they're angry. You know, this is their choice.
Mhm.
Marge, we're at 7:05. Do we want to stay on this one or move on to the next?
I think, are you guys comfortable moving on to the next one, which is restraining? Okay.
All right, our last whack for the night is when may a child be restrained? This whack lays out 4 sections. When a restraint can be used, it emphasizes the restraints cannot be a form of punishment. Restraint should be reported, and that continuing use of restraints should be approved. So let's take a minute and again, the purple is not any federal requirements, it's just highlighted discussion points. And we'll take a minute to read through this one.
I mean, how many of you had to restrain a child?
My wife has had to, our 5-year-old placement.
Okay. And are you or your wife trained on it?
Trained as in, what do you mean by the training?
So there's training that you can get through, I think, the Alliance on how to do an appropriate restraint.
And that's a certain class that you would take?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember us going through some general guidelines during licensing, but I don't remember taking a specific class for it.
Okay.
If you would like context, I can share of what our situation was.
That's okay. I just wondering, Felix, you can probably, talk more about this, but in our residential world, this is a big topic, and lots and lots of training is done in our residential staff on how to do a restraint to keep the child protected, the other kids protected, the staff protected, but not hurt the youth. So that's why I asked, what did you have any specific training behind it?
And sometimes, you don't have the training and the moment is happening where they're about to hurt themselves very
Totally.
badly. That's the situation we were in. I wasn't trained on that, didn't have time to go get the training while it was happening. So we just kept the child away from the faucet that he was slamming his head into. That's what we were doing. And we basically removed him from the bathtub because he was slamming his head against the faucet. So.
Yeah, Vaughn, and I'm not trying to break down to say you did something right or wrong, but
No,
looking
not
at the
all.
whack now, in that moment, you did do one, right? You were preventing a child from harming themselves. And if you did have to go hands-on with that child, then there's A through F, right? And then say that behavior was ongoing and you did have to continuously put on use restraints. I think the idea would be that you get permission through LD and then take that proper training, right? I don't know if you all feel that is clearly defined here.
Well, this is actually helpful because as I'm reading this, I was thinking of that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we did do the right thing.
Mhm.
which was, because in the moment, it's like, ooh, you know, what just happened, but we,
You
sent an
prevented the
email.
child from harming him or herself.
Yeah, kept the, yes, and then
Hear
we
him.
sent an email afterwards, because it was kind of jarring for all of us.
Yeah,
Sent an email to the social worker, letting them know, and also the social worker said, you know, if it becomes a pattern, then we need to discuss, you know, further things. It only, luckily in our case, happened one other time. And then we were able, through therapy and working with him and building a safe relationship with him. Those basically, the longer he was in our placement, he trusted us. We were able to avoid those situations. And so that all came along without us having to do a formal plan for it.
okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, so based upon your experience, Vaughn, would you say that this is a fair whack? Would you say that some things need to change here to be emphasized? Um, or is this whack wrong in some areas?
I'm reading it. I'm
Mhm.
on section 3, you must document your use. We documented it not because it was improperly applied or resulted in injury. We just document it and let the social worker know.
Gotcha.
So, looking at that specifically in my case, I think it's good that the social worker knows no matter what. Because if it then becomes, as we were talking about, a pattern,
Mhm.
right? Like every other night, every time I give him a bath, this is what's happening. Well, then we need to have a bigger conversation, and it needs to, you know, we need to talk about it. And like you were saying, Marjorie, like I might need some special training right now on this, and this is becoming a pattern. So I'm not reading the rest of it. I don't know if it says you must document. It's saying you must document your use of physical restraint that was improperly applied or resulted in injury.
Yeah, and this actually used to say, because this is recommended language in green, this used to say you must document all physical restraints and those that result in injury.
Mm,
So we had some
So-
feedback that only improperly implied restraints
Hmm.
should be documented.
Interesting.
But if you feel like all restraints should be
Well, I think
documented,
it's protection for the child and for the caregivers, for that
Mhm.
matter.
Just thinking about toddlers and how often you'd be reporting that you swooped that kid up into a bear hug because they're running out in traffic or trying to throw themselves on the floor at the grocery store, or, you know, I mean, all of this stuff really makes sense. And then I think about the practical application of restraint when I look at a restriction of movement by placing pressure on joints, chest, heart, or vital organs. To keep a toddler safe, you tend to, you know, kind of bear hug them or grab them around the middle and hold them.
Mhm.
And then I'd be questioning whether or not this is saying that you should report that.
So am I hearing that it can be age related? I mean, a 2-year-old you are, because they don't have that cognitive ability to say, oh, I'm gonna get hit by this car. So you're grabbing them, you're pulling them, you're picking them up.
Right.
But if you're, you know, got a 10-year-old who's darting out in traffic and you're having, you know, removing a 10-year-old, and that takes more of a physical exertion on your part to do it. What does that look, you know, what does that look like? So I think adding what, you know, if it was improperly applied, I don't know I don't know what that means, and I'm not sure a caregiver would know if it was improperly applied or not. Resulting in injury, I totally understand it. My feeling here is that caregivers at times will report every little incident to the department, and do we want to, is that necessary? So I think that's the intent of adding improperly applied or resulting in injury.
But if they haven't had training, how are they gonna know it was improperly applied?
Right, okay, yeah.
And I'm with all the teens I've had, I'd never have had to restrain a teenager,
Yeah.
but, yeah, I wouldn't know because I've never had the training if I did it wrong or right.
So do we want to take improperly applied, would you recommend just taking that out and just leaving result in an injury?
I mean, I think it's age specific for one, like you said, if it's a 2-year-old, you're grabbing them a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I mean, because I do teens, for me, I would think it should be with any restraint needed. Why? I should be reporting that to the social worker, saying this is what I had to do, and start looking at ways to change the behavior so it doesn't have to happen again, or come up with a plan, right? And get the training that's needed. So yeah, I think there kind of would have to, if you're gonna call things out, I think it kind of has to be age bracket needs to be different.
So what so maybe put some guidelines in here regarding age,
Maybe,
you know, at what,
because I've never had to restrain a child, so I've never run up against that.
Kind of big picture, talking out loud here. Actually with my daughter, and she brought up, the wording about the improperly applied, which goes back to the gal who helped her little in the bathtub, is that just brings up a whole nother can of worms. How do we know if it's improperly applied if it's not part of your basic licensing training? So I feel like if there's going to be a specific wording to improperly applied, I don't know what's improper. I was never given that training as part of my licensing. So maybe licensing needs to determine how are we going to get that training put in so everybody's aware of proper. Because I don't think you can say improperly restrained if we don't know what that improper is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think it might be a can of worms.
well, if we keep it, if y'all decide to keep that language here, then I think we need to address the training issue at CCT and build it in CCT. They talk about a general overview of training, I believe on discipline. I don't believe restraints is covered in CCT, but I can follow up on that is for you. And the other conversation is, this WAC is sitting here in our WAC chapter. And if we're talking about, restraining, but we're not training, do we need to build the training in CCT and make that part of the licensing process? I've always, this WAC confuses me because it's there in the assumption is, oh, you've been trained on it, so this is when you can do it. And I don't know if that's the case.
Then maybe it should say, if properly trained, you can, these are the guidelines, right?
I don't know where to put that. I'm gonna throw this one out. Do we need this WAC? Because we can take WAC out, or y'all can, I say we. WAC can be taken out. Do we need to put a blurb about restraints up in the discipline WAC? And make it just short, sweet, and simple, and not go into detail here. I don't know.
Like that, like in the discipline whack, restraint is not an authorized discipline
And is
without
restraining part of
a,
this, is it part of discipline? I don't, but if we change that whack to behavior management, could restraints be part of a behavior management whack?
I mean, I like the first part of the restraint whack.
Number one, A,
Yeah, 1A and I don't even know about B. Like, I'm not sure if I don't know. I guess I don't have a strong enough opinion or enough examples to weigh in on B, but I like 1 and A.
Yeah,
As a
I
way
mean,
to
I had girls that caused some pretty big damage to my home. Um, but I didn't restrain them to stop them either. It was like they needed to get that anger out, and I just let them get that anger out. Do I wish I would have had a way to stop them? Maybe, but in the grand scheme of things, they got out what they needed to get out. So,
I mean, other than like burning down your house, you know, where there's a safety issue.
Right.
And hopefully you charge, you know, the department help put your house back together, Carla, but, I mean, you know, somebody may try to restrain, a youth for, you know, so they don't kick a hole in a sheetrock wall. Well, I mean, I have my thoughts on that. I mean, is that a situation, is that serious damage? What is serious damage to a home, I guess?
I think that depends on the homeowner, right? What they consider to be serious damage. I mean, the girls punched holes in the ceiling and they punched holes in walls. All that stuff can be repaired. So, whereas if they had lit the house on fire, that would have been a completely different situation.
Mm-hmm.
and that like now is covered under A. You're not gonna not
Exactly.
have harm for self or others if you're lighting a house on fire. And so the examples I can think of all kind of like if they're severe enough to need restraints, they kind of fall in the A category. The B category is really frustrating. And I don't know if it raises to the level of permitting restraint. If it's habitual, then you have another issue there that
Mm-hmm.
you'd be then looking for that restraint plan.
So maybe recommending removing that.
I think B needs removed, in my opinion.
B needs removed, okay,
I would agree.
okay. Carla, Dawn?
I mean, it's infuriating. I can imagine being extremely angered by it, but it feels too lax to me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What about like a broken window? Because that could cut a child. Would that be harming themselves or others?
Well, I mean, if you can intervene and a child's actually like trying to smash their fist through a window, then yes, I would think you're preventing a child from harming themselves.
Yeah, but if they throw something and it breaks a window, then that's a totally different situation, right?
Right.
That's true.
Well, I think that's a great suggestion. I'll be very curious to see where this goes, when we come to negotiations. What about the rest of this whack? We have a few more minutes. You must not use as a form of punishment.
I think that statement is probably what saves the whole thing.
So keep that. Do you guys have any insight or Felix, on you may not use handcuffs or belt restraints unless ordered by a child's physician? I can't
Is that
imagine.
happening?
I can't see that would even happen.
I guess I just I don't understand the intent behind that statement.
I guess I would want to know is, you know, the VRS facilities that aren't individual homes, do they even use those kind of restraints?
I've never heard of it.
Me neither. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have heard of people using the burrito method when kids get, like an autistic child gets overwhelmed and goes nuts, right? That they roll them up in a blanket, which helps them feel secure and safe. But there's no belt, there's no nothing.
There's no belts or
to,
handcuffs.
right? It's just a blanket.
sorry,
so
I'm
they
like-
can- yeah, I don't know where any,
Okay.
I don't know any doctor that would say you could do that.
Maybe we need to do a MedCon on this one. I mean, we have several MedCons. We could add this one to it. It's like what any physician. So do you guys know, you know what a MedCon is?
Figure it out
Yeah.
based on what we're just talking about, a medical consult.
Medical, and we consult with the Children's Hospital here in Seattle. And so a physician will look at, you know, injuries or if, you know, the department's struggling with stuff to get medical guidance on it. So I think a good question for them is, in what situation would a physician order this?
I can think of maybe seizure. I remember in the past, you know, if a child has seizure disorder, but I think it definitely should go to a MedCon. Like that is, I could be speaking that was 20 years ago practice. Okay. I don't know currently.
Okay, yep, I agree. So restrictions of movement. So this is where we get into that age. Like Sheila, you're talking about the 2-3-year-old, a toddler.
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck for what a good way to address that is without making this overly complicated or, you know, some kind of crazy specific whack.
But I guess the question to also think about in 4 minutes is, you know, like redirecting a child or toddler who's running out in the street, is that truly a restraint?
Well, it would be more of an age appropriate, right? You scoop up the child to prevent them from running out in the street and you've got a hold of them. So
Yeah.
you are restraining them,
I wonder
but
what
it's
the
age
definition
appropriate.
is. I think that another thing we need to put in here for our negotiation is, what is the definition of a restraint? I don't know what it is. You know, is taking a toddler by the arm or scooping them up, or even Vaughn, you removing a 5-year-old from the tub so they don't hurt themselves. You know, when does that action become a restraint?
Well, and I guess those still all kind of fall under preventing the child from harming themselves, right? So,
Preventative injury.
yeah,
I think is more applicable. Preventing injury, not,
yeah.
you
So
know.
you could add prevent a child from harming himself or others, preventable injury. Okay.
Well, the reason it comes in like is problematic is because of number 3. Nothing in 1 is necessarily problematic by itself, but number 3 is the one where you're like, okay, now this is why we need maybe more clarification about what's restrained or what's allowed. Because if we're gonna have to report every time you scoop up a tantrum toddler or something. For me, that's where this becomes complicated is in number 3.
Okay. Redirecting, you read for toddler, you're really redirecting them. And then teaching them about cars or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not looking at it in a negative light, but I can imagine that somebody's like, hey, that counts as restraint.
So I think
You
we
are
need,
taking their physical autonomy.
I think we need to define what a restraint is. Because I don't see it to, other than restricting movement, but you know, with a toddler. And then we got to get out of here. But then choking or putting arms around the throat. I mean, is that part of a restraint? I mean, that's that's neglect.
Abuse, yeah.
That's abuse. So I think there's a lot more to discuss here. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing here so we can see everybody. Where does an hour and a half go in the evening? I always think, oh, it's going to drag on, but I mean, like an hour and a half, what goes by so fast?
I'm glad you have them in the evening because I can't do daytime ones, so I was really glad to see the evening times.
Well, yes, Carla, we will always have, you know, with our caregiver, foster care NRM, we're gonna have to have day and evening just to meet the schedules of our caregivers who are really busy during the day or have, you know, most of you have another job. So we will be, you know, doing that always in the future. So reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in the address if you guys are interested. And Anna, did you keep track of who was interested in the chat? Sometimes I lose track of this chat.
I did.
Okay, thank you. I'm leaving out of town, but I will be back next week. And if you're interested and want to talk more on a one-on-one, I'd be more than happy to set up a time. Okay, any questions before y'all leave? I appreciate you all being here. Thank you. Felix, good to see you on camera and in person today. Anna, if you can just like get me your notes and just put them in the folder. I'll be back on Tuesday.
Will do.
All right, guys.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Woo.
Ooh, I forgot to stop recording.
Oh, I'm glad you remembered to record.
All right. Well, I will do that. And you have a good night.
You, honey.